No one sends a letter to the Pope addressed only by his first name, especially not a letter smudged, handwritten, with the trembling penmanship of someone facing death. But there it was in the carved oak desk of his private study, a single word on the envelope, scrawled in almost childish strokes. Robert. Not Your Holiness. Not Pope Leo XIV. Just Robert. And what was inside that letter would awaken a ghost he had buried over 40 years ago. That morning, the light filtering through the windows of St. Peter's Dome was soft, golden, almost sacred. But the Pope's eyes were fixed on the paper in front of him, as if the entire world had stopped. The messenger had left the envelope among dozens of official documents without ceremony. No one suspected anything. But as his eyes traced those uneven lines, written with effort and pain, something inside him quietly unraveled. I know who you are. I know what you've become. But before you were the Holy Father, you were just a boy. And I was the man who killed your father. Robert didn't breathe. The color drained from his face. He felt the chair vanish beneath him, and for a moment thought he was relapsing into the exhaustion that had haunted him for months. But it wasn't his body that failed. It was the past. It was the soul. The handwriting was fragile, but deliberate. The sender claimed to be Raymond Decker, imprisoned for decades for other crimes, sentenced to life in a federal prison in the United States. Now, with terminal cancer, he said he had one last request: to confess the murder of Robert's father, a crime never solved. Robert felt the weight of the paper in his hands as if holding the very bones of the past. 40 years. 40 years of silence. The official story claimed his father had vanished on an ordinary night, likely the victim of a botched robbery. His body was never found. The police gave up. The family fell silent. His mother, marked by grief, never spoke of it again. And now, this. The Pope rose slowly, walked to the window. Outside, tourists crowded St. Peter's Square, awaiting a blessing, a gesture, a word. But he had nothing to offer in that moment. Only questions. Why now? Why him? And why, of all things, did the letter call him Robert? The name he hadn't heard in years. The name before the collar, before the altar, before the world saw him as a symbol. The name only the dead whispered. He picked up the envelope again. No seal, no Vatican insignia, just the name, and the scent of faint odor of aged paper and human sweat. Real, raw, painful. In the Curious halls, no one knew. Not Matteo, not his secretaries, not even his confessors. Because no one knew the Pope had a murdered father. No one knew that behind the hands blessing multitudes was a boy who had never said goodbye to his own father. Robert returned to his desk, folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his Bible, between Psalm 88 and 89, the Psalms of the dark night of the soul. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't pray. He just wept. The kind of weeping no one hears. That isn't shown. That isn't permitted. Weeping that doesn't come from the Pope, but from Robert, the son of a murdered man, now about to face the killer. Not as judge, not as shepherd, but as a son, searching for what remained of himself. And this was only the beginning. He paced the room. Each step echoed in the silence, bouncing off centuries-old walls lined with books and secrets. He had walked these halls with the weight of the church on his shoulders, but never had the burden felt so personal, so invasive. This wasn't about faith, doctrine, or diplomacy. This was about blood. His father's blood. Robert remembered the night it happened. He had been barely 10. The last image etched into his memory was of his father's back, walking out into the rain, saying he would be back before dinner. But he never came back. The next morning, police officers stood at their door. His mother collapsed before they even spoke. No answers, no body, only pain and silence. For years, Robert believed the lie that it was just a robbery, a senseless act of violence in a broken neighborhood. But the letter had cracked that illusion wide open. The man in the prison cell hadn't just killed his father, he claimed to have chosen him, selected him for a reason. Why? He sat again and reread the final lines of the letter. I am dying. but I cannot die with this on my soul. Come see me. I must tell you the rest. I need your forgiveness, Robert. Not as the Pope, as the son. It was signed in shaky ink, Raymond Decker, a name that meant nothing to the world, but now it meant everything to him. He stood abruptly, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook, the kind he hadn't touched in years. Inside were notes from his seminary days, thoughts on suffering, mercy, and redemption. In the margins, his own questions scribbled in youth. Can we forgive what we cannot understand? Does God forgive everyone, even murderers? Could I? He closed the book. Outside, the bells of St. Peter's began to toll. Noon. The city moved on, pilgrims lining up for blessings, cameras flashing, tourists marveling at history. No one knew that inside the apostolic palace, the Pope was questioning not his faith, but the very foundation of who he was. He didn't know what he would do. He didn't know if he could face that man. But something deeper, older than logic, stirred inside him. He had to know the truth. Not as the Pope, as Robert. And so, with shaking hands and a heart that hadn't felt this raw in decades, he picked up the phone, dialed a secure line, and gave the first order that would change everything. Prepare a flight. No entourage, no press, just me. The silence on the other end was stunned. Yes, Your Holiness. The voice finally replied, May I ask, where to? Robert looked down at the letter again, lips barely moving as he whispered, To meet the man who murdered my father. He hadn't spoken his father's name aloud in over 3 decades. There were times when he thought he had forgotten it entirely. Not the sound of it, but the weight. The way it used to hang in the air during dinner time, in laughter, in the softness of bedtime stories. But trauma has its own kind of mercy. It doesn't erase names. It buries them beneath layers of survival. That night, Pope Leo XIV sat in his private chamber and whispered it. Once, twice, like a man invoking a ghost. James. The name brought a sting to his throat. The sound was warm, human, and unbearable. His father had been a mechanic, a man of calloused hands, and a laugh that filled the house before the world turned cold. He wasn't rich, he wasn't famous, but he was his. A constant, quiet presence in the background of a chaotic world. And then, gone. Murdered. And now, apparently, targeted. Robert closed his eyes and let himself return. He was 10. Rain hit the window like small fists. His father had kissed his forehead, ruffled his hair, and walked out the front door with the words, Back in a bit, champ. Champ. That word alone could kill him now. His mother had waited. An hour. Then 2. She called friends. The garage. The hospital. Nothing. Then the doorbell rang. 2 officers. No answers. Only a face that said everything. He never came back. There was no funeral, no closure, just a framed photo on a dusty mantel and a mother who never smiled the same way again. Robert hadn't cried much back then, not because he didn't want to, but because his mother couldn't afford to fall apart. She became everything: cook, nurse, teacher, protector. And to protect him, she locked her pain away, and his too. He grew up quickly. The church became his sanctuary, a place of silence, of ritual, of order, a place where the chaos of unanswered grief could be pressed into prayer and purpose. He never told the full truth to his mentors. Just that his father had died when he was young. That was enough. No one asked more. Until now. Until a dying man had written his name with trembling hands and shattered decades of numbness. Robert opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out an old wooden box. He hadn't opened it in years. It was chipped, small, unimpressive, but inside were the last physical remnants of a childhood he had buried. A watch, his father's. A baseball glove worn and cracking. And a photo creased, faded, but intact. It showed James holding a very young Robert on his shoulders, both laughing, a carnival behind them. Robert touched the edge of the picture like one touches a relic. Carefully, reverently, afraid it might vanish. He felt the tears return, but held them back. Not yet. Not now. He slipped the photo into his cassock pocket. A private act. A shield. If he was going to face this, he needed something to remind him that his father had lived, not just died. He turned on his desk lamp and returned to the letter. He reread it slowly, searching between the lines, hunting for something: truth, remorse, or maybe an answer that might finally stitch the wound shut. But it wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed why. Why was his father chosen? Why did Raymond Decker write now, after all these years? And why had he called him Robert? The way only someone who knew his real pain would dare to. Outside, the moon hung low over Rome, casting a silvery glow on the rooftops. The city was quiet, unaware that its most sacred figure was spiraling back into the pain of a 10-year-old boy who never got to say goodbye. Robert stood and moved toward the crucifix hanging above his bed. He had stood before this cross every night for years, offering prayers for others, but tonight he had none left to give. He looked up. "Why now, Lord?" he whispered. "Why him? Why me?" No voice answered. Only silence. But in that silence he felt something stir. A memory? A call? No, a necessity. If God had brought this to him now, after all these years, there had to be a reason. Not vengeance, not even justice. But maybe liberation. Maybe the only way forward was back. He knew what he had to do. Tomorrow, the Vatican would prepare an unofficial trip. No press, no entourage, just a man returning to the wound he had spent his life covering with robes and rituals. He wasn't sure what he would say to the man. He wasn't sure he could forgive him. But he was sure of one thing. The past was bleeding again. And this time, he would not turn away. The silence in the papal study was deeper than usual. It wasn't the kind of silence born from reverence or routine. It was the heavy, suffocating stillness of a decision waiting to be made. On the edge of his desk lay the same letter, now folded neatly, but its weight hadn't diminished. It pressed against his thoughts, like a stone lodged in the chest. Robert had slept little. Sleep, when it came, was fragmented, filled with half-dreams, with images of his father's smile twisted into confusion, and a voice he couldn't place repeating the same phrase, "He chose him." That morning, as the city of Rome stirred under the gentle light of early day, Pope Leo XIV sat across from his most trusted advisor, Cardinal Matteo Visconti. "I need your help," Robert said quietly. Matteo, now in his early 80s, looked up with his ever-calm gaze. His face, lined by time and sacrifice, didn't flinch. "I'm listening." Robert slid the letter across the table. Matteo read it silently. He didn't blink. When he finished, he placed it down slowly, folding his hands. "A prisoner," Matteo said. "Terminally ill. Confessing to a murder that's personal." Robert nodded once. Matteo's voice remained steady, but softer now. "You've never spoken of your father's death." "There was nothing to speak of," Robert replied almost instinctively. "That's what I told myself for years. And now? Now I know it wasn't random." The two men sat in silence. Matteo knew better than to offer immediate counsel. He had mentored Robert for decades, watched him rise through the church with humility and strength. But this was different. This wasn't a matter of theology or diplomacy. This was blood. Robert leaned forward. "I need a name. Raymond Decker. I want to know everything about him. Where he is, what he's done. If this confession is real." Matteo didn't question the request. He simply nodded. "Give me until evening." The Pope stood. "And Matteo, no one else can know." A quiet sigh. "Of course." By dusk, a manila file lay on Robert's desk. It was thicker than expected. The file included prison records, court transcripts, newspaper clippings. Raymond Decker, born in Illinois, a career criminal, armed robbery, drug trafficking, suspected in multiple disappearances during the late 70s. He had never been a high-profile case, just another ghost lost in America's prison system. But there, halfway down the report, was the detail that turned Robert's stomach cold. Decker was arrested 4 months after his father's disappearance. In the same city, on an unrelated charge. The timing was more than suspicious. He turned the page. There was a photo-grainy old, a mugshot. Decker's face stared blankly into the camera. He was young, lean, eyes hollow. But Robert felt something unexpected. Not hate. Recognition. This was the face of a man who had shaped his life without ever knowing him. He flipped further. The final report listed his current location, St. Helena Correctional Facility, Louisiana, a maximum security institution, and beneath that, Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. Less than 3 months to live. Robert leaned back. The man who had taken his father was dying alone in a prison cell, thousands of miles away. And yet, he had reached out. Not to the Pope, not to the church. To Robert, the boy he had wounded. That night, Robert sat in prayer, but not in St. Peter's. He had quietly made his way to a smaller, older chapel within the Vatican, hidden from public view. It was a place he had discovered years ago, where popes once came to confess their own doubts to empty walls. He lit a single candle. "Kyrie eleison," he whispered. "Lord, have mercy." His eyes stayed open. He wasn't there to close himself off. He wanted the pain to remain visible. He thought of Maria Clara, of the promise he had made to her on her deathbed. Don't let him grow up thinking he was a mistake. And now, he faced another promise waiting to be made or broken. Would he go? Would he offer peace to a man who had shattered his? He stood. He already knew the answer. The following morning, Vatican security was briefed under a veil of secrecy. A private trip. No press, no cameras, no public blessing. The official schedule would state that the Pope had entered a spiritual retreat for 3 days. In truth, Robert was preparing to board a discreet flight to Louisiana. He packed lightly, a plain black clerical shirt, a worn crucifix, his father's photo. As the car pulled away from the Vatican gates in the early morning darkness, he looked back only once. No one waved. No one suspected. And for the first time in his papacy, he felt like he wasn't leaving as a leader. He was leaving as a son. The plane was small, discreet, operated by a Vatican diplomatic contact who asked no questions. During the flight, Robert didn't read, didn't write, didn't even pray. He stared at the clouds with the quiet intensity of someone preparing for a storm. But this time, the storm was not outside. It was waiting behind steel bars, with oxygen tubes and regrets, wearing the face of a dying man. As they approached American airspace, the pilot leaned back and said softly, "We'll be landing in Baton Rouge in 20 minutes, Your Holiness." Robert nodded. "Thank you. And please, I'm not the Pope here." The pilot hesitated. "Then, what should I call you?" Robert looked out the window again. Just Robert. The landing was smooth. An unmarked car waited near the tarmac. The driver was silent, professionally detached. Robert watched the unfamiliar landscape pass by swamps, billboards, prison fences. It all felt like another world, and yet it was his. St. Helena Correctional Facility came into view slowly. The outer walls were high, the barbed wire glinting under the southern sun. It looked like what it was, a place built to forget the people inside it. Robert took a deep breath as the car rolled to a stop. His fingers tightened around the small photo in his pocket. It was time, the encounter. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Sterile air, mixed with a sharp sting of disinfectant and rusted metal. It wasn't the smell of fear or death, though both were present, but of time. Time that had settled into the walls of the prison, growing heavier with each year. St. Helena wasn't a place of punishment. It was a place of abandonment. Robert followed the guard down a long corridor lined with faded green paint and flickering lights. His cassock had been left behind. He wore plain black, shirt, trousers, shoes, no ring, no zucchetto, no gold, just a simple cross around his neck and the weight of a life he hadn't lived. The guard, a tall man with dark skin and tired eyes, glanced at him only once. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked without malice. Robert nodded. I am. The man shrugged. Most people don't come here for peace. I'm not here for peace, Robert said. I'm here for truth. The guard stopped in front of a reinforced door with a small, smudged window. He's in there. He can't walk no more. Barely eats. Just lies in that bed waiting for— He didn't finish the sentence. Press the buzzer when you're done. Robert placed his hand on the door handle but hesitated. And then he opened it. The room was dim. One narrow bed, one frail body, one chair. The man lying there was barely more than a shadow of his former self. Skin clung to bone, eyes sunken. The tubes that ran into his nose hissed softly, keeping time like a metronome for a dying confession. Robert stepped in, closed the door behind him. The man stirred. Who is it? The voice rasped. Robert walked forward slowly. My name is Robert. A pause. Then the eyes opened, slowly, as if peeling back a curtain. The man squinted, then smiled crooked, weak, but unmistakable. I was afraid you wouldn't come. Robert sat. He didn't answer. He just watched. Raymond Decker coughed. It sounded like gravel being crushed in his lungs. He reached toward the small table beside the bed and fumbled for a cup of water. His hand trembled. Robert took it first, held it for him, tilted it gently. Raymond drank. Only a sip, but enough. Didn't think you'd give water to the man who broke your world, Raymond whispered. I'm not here to punish you, Robert replied. Raymond chuckled. It turned into another cough. No, you're the Pope now. Holier than thou. I'm not the Pope here. Raymond's eyes glimmered. Then who are you? Robert answered without hesitation. The son of the man you murdered. Silence. The words lingered in the room like incense in a chapel. Heavy, sacred, unavoidable. Raymond looked away. His lips quivered. I know what I did. Do you? I remember his face, he whispered. I remember the way he looked at me, not with fear, but with confusion, like he didn't understand why. I didn't either. I was just following orders. A job. Quick cash. I thought it wouldn't matter. Robert's jaw clenched. It mattered. Raymond nodded. A tear escaped the corner of his eye. I know. The next words came slowly, painfully. I watched you grow up on television. I saw your face when they announced your name. Pope Leo XIV. I knew it was you. Knew it the moment they said where you were from. And I knew that someday I had to tell you. Why now? Because I'm dying, Raymond said, and because no priest in this place would understand what I needed to confess. Only you. Robert leaned forward. Then, confess. The old man took a deep breath. It wasn't supposed to be your father. He was just in the way. The real target was someone else. Your father had overheard something at work, I think. Something he shouldn't have. He was going to tell the police, so they paid me to make it quiet. Robert's eyes narrowed. Who paid you? Raymond shook his head. I never knew names. Just a voice on the phone. Money in a locker. It was all shadows. I was young, desperate, and stupid. Why didn't you confess sooner? I tried. Once. Years ago. Wrote a letter to your old parish, but I never sent it. Burned it, instead. I didn't think you needed the burden, but now. He coughed again, this time harsher. Now I need to say it. I need you to hear it. I'm listening. Raymond closed his eyes. I killed your father. I stole him from you. I broke something sacred, and I've never known a day of peace since. Robert didn't speak. The silence stretched. Then finally he asked, Do you want forgiveness? Raymond opened his eyes again. More than anything. And what if I can't give it? Then I'll die as I deserve. But I had to ask. Robert stood. Walked to the window. The sky was clouded. No light reached the bars. You know, he said quietly, I've given absolution to murderers, to tyrants, to thieves. I've offered mercy to men who never once regretted their sins. He turned. But this is different. Raymond's lips trembled. I know. Robert walked back. sat down, took a long breath. "I'm not ready to forgive you." Raymond nodded, slowly. "But I came here, and I listened. And that, I hope, means something," Raymond whispered. "It means everything." Robert rose. He pressed the buzzer. The guard's footsteps echoed outside. Before the door opened, Raymond reached out with one trembling hand. Robert hesitated, then took it. A fragile touch, skin to skin, the hand of the killer and the son of the dead. "I'm sorry," Raymond said. "I know," Robert replied. The door creaked open, and the Pope walked out. The flight back to Rome was long and silent. The Pope didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He barely moved. Seated in the rear of the private jet, far from the noise of the engines and the world, ele fitava o vazio. Outside the window, clouds drifted in slow procession, like the thoughts he couldn't contain. The face of the dying man haunted him, not because of hatred, but because of what he had felt during that final moment when he took the hand of the man who murdered his father. Pity, sadness, but also the seed of something else. The beginning of forgiveness. And yet, something didn't sit right. There was a sentence, one single phrase that had echoed in the cell like a forgotten hymn. Your father was not the target. The Pope had heard countless confessions in his life, some sincere, others distorted by guilt or shame, but that phrase carried a weight that wouldn't lift. It planted doubt. And doubt, when it settles in the heart of a man of God, becomes a kind of heresy that no doctrine can cleanse. Upon his return to the Vatican, no one questioned his absence. His closest aides believed he had been on retreat. Some assumed it was political. Others, spiritual. No one dared to ask. But Cardinal Matteo Visconti knew. The moment the Pope stepped into his private chamber, Matteo was already there, waiting beside the window, hands folded over his cane. "You went," Matteo said softly. The Pope nodded. He placed the small leather bag beside the desk, removed his coat, and sat. "I had to." Matteo looked at him for a long moment before replying. "Did you forgive him?" The Pope didn't answer immediately. "I listened," he said. "I held his hand. I told him I wasn't ready." Matteo closed his eyes, as if offering a silent prayer for both of them. "He said my father wasn't the real target," the Pope continued, "that it was a mistake, but it didn't feel like a lie. It felt like fear." Matteo slowly opened his eyes. "Fear of what?" "I don't know," the Pope said, "but I intend to find out." That night, he ordered access to sealed archives buried beneath the Apostolic Palace. These were not the Vatican secret archives made famous by documentaries and conspiracies. These were older, darker. A collection of case files, correspondences, and internal investigations, some dating back centuries, guarded by only a handful of living clerics. Files marked non destinato alla lettura, never meant to be read. The Pope descended alone. Torch-like lamps lit the subterranean chamber in patches of dim gold. He moved slowly, his hand gliding along the rows of worn bindings and dust-coated shelves. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but then he found it. A box marked Obris Interrompitus, 1977, the year his father died. He opened it. Inside were pages faded with age, reports of internal surveillance, newspaper clippings, photocopies of legal transcripts. Most were irrelevant, until he reached a small envelope sealed with wax. It bore no name, only an emblema cog entwined with a cross. The Pope's hand trembled. He had seen that symbol once before, in a letter left by the old priest Giordano, years ago, during the events that had shaken the Church in the second year of his papacy. The same symbol tied to a Obrithi secret organization that once infiltrated the Vatican hierarchy. He broke the seal. Inside, he found a typewritten document labeled Testimuna V, Archivo Incompleto. And as he read it, his breath caught. The testimony was brief but explosive. It described a mechanic named James, the Pope's father, who had inadvertently discovered coded documents while repairing a diplomat's vehicle in Chicago. The documents contained information linking church officials to off-the-record financial transfers and political manipulation abroad. James had apparently confided in a friend, expressing fear that he had seen too much. The testimony claimed that within weeks he had disappeared. There was no mention of murder, no names, but there it was, in black and white. The Pope's father had stumbled into something worth silencing. He leaned back against the cold stone wall. His father wasn't just a victim, he was a threat. And someone inside the church, someone powerful, had made sure that threat was erased. The Pope sat alone in the underground vault for a long time. He read the testimony again. Then again. He tried to recall every detail of his father's life, every moment, every word, but memory fails when loaded with emotion. And now, the past was no longer a tragedy. It was a crime with threads still tangled in the walls of the Vatican itself. He stood. This couldn't be kept secret. But it couldn't be exposed, either not yet. Not until he knew how deep it went. He returned to the surface, carrying the document in his breast pocket as if it were a hidden relic or a forbidden gospel. Later that night, in his private chapel, the Pope placed the paper beside a candle and whispered the only prayer he could muster. "Father, I will not rest until I know who wanted you dead. I will not rest until they look me in the eyes." He didn't pray for justice. He prayed for strength. Because what he had just uncovered was only the beginning. The Vatican was never truly silent. Even in the dead of night, beneath its marble bones and frescoed ceilings, life murmured through the pipes and cracks. Wind pressed against stained glass. Ancient wood creaked like old men sighing. But on this particular night, the Pope didn't hear any of it. Because inside him, there was a war louder than the centuries around him. He sat alone in the Domus Sanctae Marthae, the private residence where he had once found solace. Tonight, there was no peace in the soft light of the desk lamp, no comfort in the open Bible on the table. Not even the scent of incense burned out hours ago could wash away the heaviness pressing against his ribs. The truth had come too fast. His father hadn't just been murdered. He had been silenced, erased, by people who might still be alive, perhaps still inside the very walls the Pope now guarded. He had built his papacy on the foundations of truth, justice, and reform. But how could he speak of reform when the very foundation of his own life was rotten? He pressed his fingertips against his temples. He wasn't just tired. He was ashamed. At dawn, he walked. No guards, no agenda. Just the Pope in black, slipping through the Vatican gardens like a penitent seeking shade. The statues of saints watched him silently as he passed. He didn't pray to them. He didn't look up. He was searching for something he couldn't name. Eventually, he found it, the old labyrinth. A forgotten corner of the garden that few visited. A circular path of hedges and gravel, once used by meditating priests, now left to moss and silence. The Pope stepped inside. With each turn of the labyrinth, memories surfaced. His father's laughter. His mother's silence. The taste of soup on a cold night. The thump of police knocks on the door. The words from the dying man's lips. And the page crinkled, yellowed that now burned inside his cassock like a hidden wound. He paused at the labyrinth's center. He looked at his hands. They had baptized thousands, crowned saints, signed treaties, and embraced the sick. But now they trembled. Was it rage? No. It was doubt. Doubt that forgiveness was enough. Doubt that the church could be cleansed without burning down its oldest walls. Doubt that God still spoke to him at all. He clenched his fists. "Show me what to do," he whispered, "because I'm lost." The wind rustled the leaves. Nothing more. No miracle, no voice, only silence. He had never felt more human than at that moment. And never more alone. Later that morning, Cardinal Matteo found him in the library. The Pope had returned without a word, changed his clothes, and buried himself in documents. Matteo stood in the doorway, hesitant. "You haven't rested," he said gently. The Pope didn't look up. "I can't afford to." Matteo stepped closer. "You found something, didn't you?" "I found evidence that my father was killed to protect men in this church." A pause. "Still living?" The Pope looked up now, eyes heavy. I don't know, but if I find them, what will you do? Matteo interrupted. The Pope didn't answer. Matteo sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. You cannot become what you fight. That's what they fear, that you will expose them out of vengeance. I don't want vengeance, the Pope whispered. I want to burn away the rot. Then do it as a shepherd, not as a son. The Pope closed his eyes. He hated that Matteo was right, and he hated that he didn't know if he could obey. That night, he returned to the chapel. Not the ornate one used for public masses. The small one. The one with cracked stone and a single flickering lamp. He knelt before the crucifix. And for the first time since the day he had become Pope, he confessed out loud, I don't know who I am anymore. He said it with eyes wide open. I'm not just your servant. I'm a broken child, a furious man, a son who wants justice and doesn't know if it's yours or mine. He swallowed. If you still hear me, then show me how to carry this. The flame on the altar danced. No voice answered. But something settled in him. Not peace, but clarity. He rose. He wasn't ready to forgive the Church, but he was ready to fight for it. Chapter 7. The Forgiveness. The Pope entered the cell without guards, without announcements. The nurse opened the door silently and stepped aside. This time, Raymond Decker looked smaller. His body had deflated further, his face pale and hollow. The man who once pulled a trigger could now barely lift his head. He sensed the Pope's presence before seeing him. His lips moved, barely a whisper. You came back. The Pope sat down beside the bed without responding. He reached for the cup of water on the table and helped Raymond drink. The man's hand was weightless, his skin thin like parchment. I didn't think you would return, Raymond murmured. Neither did I, the Pope said. But here I am. Raymond gave a broken smile. He coughed a harsh, dry sound that echoed like something breaking from within. Death was close now. It filled the corners of the room like fog. I came because I need to close this, the Pope continued. Not for you, for myself, for my father, for God. The man closed his eyes. His chest rose slowly, as if relieved to hear what he had longed to believe. I'm not here to set you free, said the Pope. That is God's work. But I'm here to say, yes, I forgive you. Raymond trembled. I don't deserve it. Forgiveness is not about deserving, the Pope replied. It's about release. I release myself from the hate, from the silence, from the chain you wrapped around my soul the day you took my father. A tear rolled down the old man's face. Thank you. You are more of a man than I ever was. The Pope looked at him with calm eyes, though they carried a storm. I'm not more, I'm just a son, trying to breathe again. Raymond tried to lift his hand. The Pope took it. The touch was fragile, skin to skin, no act, no audience. Just two human beings, one seeking peace, the other learning how to give it. There's something else. You need to know, Raymond said, breath faltering. The Pope leaned in. I heard names. Names? When I got paid, 2 men, Italians. They said the mechanic is interfering too much. One had a Roman accent. The other was a priest. The Pope's expression froze. Do you remember the names? Raymond coughed again. His body convulsed as if fighting death for one last moment. Then, with great effort, he whispered, Visconti. Time stopped. The Pope felt like he had been punched. The name echoed inside his chest like a bell struck in the dark. Visconti. There was only one Visconti in the Vatican. Cardinal Matteo Visconti. His confessor, his advisor, his friend. The Pope stepped back from the bed, stunned, but before he could respond, Raymond coughed violently. His chest shook, his eyes turned upward, then nothing. Silence. Raymond Decker was dead. Mouth still parted. His final breath gone. The name of a possible traitor hanging in the air like incense without flame. The Pope didn't move. He simply stood there, watching the body of the man who had shattered his childhood go still. There was no triumph, no relief. Just the strange sensation that forgiveness had arrived too late. He knelt. He made the sign of the cross. And he prayed, May God receive you, Raymond, and may the truth you left behind not be buried with you." When he exited the cell, the nurse glanced at him gently. He said nothing, just nodded once. In the car ride back to the airport, the Pope stared at the simple wooden cross hanging from his neck. Visconti. The name kept burning, and he knew what had to be done. This time, there would be no forgiveness until the truth was brought to light. Chapter 8. The Homily. The square was overflowing. From the colonnades of St. Peter's to the very edges of the city, tens of thousands had gathered. Tourists, pilgrims, priests, skeptics. The crowd pulsed like a living heart, restless, expectant, unaware that history was about to breathe through a microphone perched at the edge of marble. The Pope stood behind the curtain, silent. He could hear the chanting outside, the scattered songs in different languages, the hum of life that always preceded something sacred. But his mind was not on the crowd. It was on the name, Visconti. He had not confronted the cardinal. Not yet. He had returned from America with a body in the ground and a truth too dangerous to speak. And still, he carried it like a fire sealed inside a glass jar. What he was about to do would not expose names, but it would shift the soul of the church. He stepped forward. The bells rang. The crowd hushed. And when the Pope appeared, dressed in simple white, his eyes clear but shadowed by something unspoken, a ripple passed through the multitude, like the stillness before a storm. He did not open with greetings. He did not smile. He placed his hands on the pulpit and spoke. "There are wounds in this world that do not bleed. Silence. Wounds that walk with us, sit beside us at meals, sleep beneath our pillows. These wounds are not visible in mirrors. They are stitched into memory, into the silence of our prayers, into the trembling of hands that look strong." He paused. "I speak to you not today as a pope, but as a man who carries such a wound." Eyes across the square locked on him. Some leaned closer. Others wept without knowing why. "There was a man," he continued, "whose life was taken unjustly. A father, a worker, a soul who never asked for greatness, only dignity. His life was stolen, his family left broken. And for years, that boy, his son, carried a question that had no answer." The Pope looked up. "That boy was me." A collective gasp. "Before I was Leo XIV, I was simply Robert. Before I wore this robe, I wore silence, and that silence nearly destroyed me." He gripped the pulpit more tightly. "We teach forgiveness. We preach it. But what we do not say enough is that forgiveness does not come without pain. To forgive is not to forget. To forgive is to look into the face of what destroyed you and say, 'You will not hold me anymore.'" Somewhere in the front row, a nun fainted. A child asked his mother if the Pope was crying. He was. "Recently," he said, voice softer now, "I met the man who took my father's life. I went to his bedside. I looked into his dying eyes, and I forgave him." Murmurs spread like wildfire. The Pope raised his voice. "I did not forgive to absolve his crime. That is God's domain. I forgave so that I could live, so that my soul would not remain chained to his act. And in doing so, I discovered something deeper, a truth that I am compelled to share with all of you." He leaned closer to the microphone. "We are all wounded. Every person in this square has been hurt, betrayed, forgotten. But the true measure of a soul is not how much it has suffered. It is what we choose to do with that suffering." A swell of murmured prayers began among the faithful. The Pope looked down at his notes, then closed the folder gently. "I had prepared a different homily," he said. "Pages of scripture, beautiful phrases, but none of that felt honest today." He took a breath. "So here is my homily, and may God forgive its simplicity." He stepped back, opened his arms to the crowd. "If you are angry, forgive. If you are bitter, release. If you have been wronged, do not carry that weight into another sunrise. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is the strength to say, 'You cannot define me anymore.'" The square was silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He placed his hand over his heart. I forgave the man who stole my father from me. And in that forgiveness, I found the courage to become something more than a title. I became a son again." He lowered his head. "And may we all, each of us, become sons and daughters once more, healed not by justice, but by grace." The crowd erupted, not in cheers, in sobs, in applause, in silence that said everything words could not. As the Pope stepped down from the pulpit, his eyes met those of Cardinal Visconti, seated among the curia. The old man did not move. His hands remained clasped, but his eyes were moist. Neither blinked. The Pope walked past him, without a word. The war was not over, but the line had been drawn. The basilica was empty. Not silent, never truly silent, but empty in a way that made the air feel heavier, sacred. The tourists had gone. The cameras were off. The curia had long since returned to their palaces and quarters. The marble floor beneath the Pope's boots echoed with each slow step, echoed like the memories that now lived fully awake within him. In his hands he held only one thing, a candle, small, unlit, ordinary, and yet it held more weight than any document he had ever signed, more truth than any sermon he had ever spoken. The Pope moved past rows of pews, past the bronze statue of St. Peter, past the altar that had seen centuries of triumphs and betrayals. He descended the narrow staircase that led to the crypt below, the tombs of popes sleeping like stone shadows. But he wasn't there for them. He was there for him. In a quiet corner where the public did not tread, where no camera had ever been allowed, the Pope knelt before a small plaque on the wall, a plaque with no photograph, no dates, no titles. Only a name. James Alcott. His father. The Pope rested the candle on the cold floor, took a match from his cassock, and struck it. The flame danced into life, casting a warm glow over the plaque, over his face, over the memory. He watched it flicker. "I came as a priest when I was ordained," he whispered. "I came as a pope when I was crowned. But tonight," he placed his hand on the ground, "I come as your son." His voice trembled, but he did not stop. "They told me to forget you. They said it was too painful to keep talking about what happened. And for years, I believed them. I buried you in silence. I buried you in duty." His hand tightened into a fist. "But you were never silence. You were love. You were laughter in the garage. You were the warmth behind my mother's eyes before she stopped smiling." He looked up at the flame. "I found the man who took you. He's gone now. And I forgave him. I forgave him not because I wanted to, but because I had to, because hating him kept me further from you." Tears slipped down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them. "And I learned something, Father. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean erasing. It means remembering without pain. And I wanted to tell you, I remember you now." He reached into his cassock and pulled out a photograph. The one from long ago. The carnival, the boy on his father's shoulders. He placed it on the ground beside the candle. "I'm not afraid anymore," the Pope whispered, "and I won't keep you hidden." He stood slowly. The candle remained, burning strong. He turned, stepped back toward the stairs, but something made him stop. A sound. Not a voice, not a vision, just the sound of the flame, alive. And in that flicker, in that fragile light, he understood. This wasn't just about his father. It was about all fathers, all sons, all children carrying wounds the world doesn't see. He walked up the stairs with purpose now, emerging into the empty basilica like a man reborn. His steps echoed once more, but they no longer sounded hollow. Outside, the square was empty too. The stars had taken back the sky. But one figure stood waiting at the gates. Pedro, his son. The boy had not spoken much since Maria Clara died. He had stayed close, watched from shadows, unsure if the world could ever make space for who he was. But now, the Pope approached him, and without a word, took his hand. Pedro looked up. "Where were you?" The Pope didn't smile. He didn't lie. "I was saying goodbye," he said. "And hello." "To who?" "To the man I used to be." Pedro tilted his head. unsure. "Come," the Pope said. "I want to show you something." Together they walked back inside the basilica, just the two of them. And as they stood before the altar, the Pope knelt beside his son and lit another candle. This time, he didn't say anything. He let the flame speak. And Pedro understood. They stayed like that for a long time. One flame for the past, one for the future. Both carried in silence by a man no longer bound by his robes, but crowned, finally, by his humanity.